So as you heard, San Francisco, which is the urban center of Silicon Valley, is currently attracting tens of thousands of young tech workers into the area. And that happens per year. So you would guess that the Bay Area is doing really well with influx or increase of institutional wealth that is collected by all the taxes, increasingly educated population, the high concentration of young people, and an overall healthy economy. Yet this success has been shadowed by a really serious housing crisis. It's a housing crisis that affects everyone in the area. In the last 5 years, almost 50,000 people moved into the city. The population is increasing really, really rapidly. Yet only 7,500 new homes were built during that time. So that is 40,000 less homes than necessary right now. Bay Area cities have been very slow and conservative to provide new housing for decades already. There are a lot of reasons for this, and I won't be able to get into all of those today, but some of them are, for example, opposition from current homeowners, as well as the city officials who are trying to avoid increasing costs in infrastructure that's related to building new housing. So the substantial increase of cost of living has not only put pressure on housing itself, but any aspects of the city, really. While it may be easier than ever to start a digital business these days, it's also increasingly more difficult to open a physical location in the Bay Area. So it's been interesting to watch the city transform over the last few years that I've been living there. And today I want to share some of my observations on how the Bay Area is dealing with this difficult situation right now. And we're not going to focus on the negative aspects of that crisis, and instead we're going to take a look at how more bottom-up, roots-level movements have made effort to make the city more livable for the masses. So how do we design for the unanticipated, or spontaneous, or unpredictable? And where do we also position ourselves as designers in this disruptive realm? So San Francisco, looking back a little bit, San Francisco grew out of the gold rush when America was young. The population boomed and a new Western commerce center was established. So before the first tech boom of Silicon Valley, the hippie movement in San Francisco, San Francisco was the home for the hippie movement during that time. The Castro district also played and still plays a key role in the LGBT rights movement. And the Beat movement established a young generation of urbanites who opposed to the mid-century suburbanization and kind of challenged that American dream during that time. So this is what San Francisco and the area is all about. So things move very fast there, and that happens despite a lot of opposition for change. So considering that history, it's not surprising that San Francisco is now innovating itself out of some of these problems. Among the more well-known innovations that grew out of the shortage of infrastructure are Airbnb and Uber and Zipcar. And today we're going to look at some of the less publicized or less known movements that haven't yet grown into larger companies. And those movements aim to substitute what the home in the city can't offer for everyone. We will look at a few examples of how the city is moving past the blockade of restrictions by embracing disruption and change. And we will wrap up by talking about our role as designers in this changing environment. So a few images of the San Francisco scene, which is pretty built up already. So what parts of the home can these kinds of bottom-up movements challenge or replace? We're going to take a look at the bathroom first. It's not a typical way to start the home tour, but this one might be worth it. So San Francisco is facing a very serious homelessness crisis. It's not new to San Francisco, but it has been gotten a lot more severe lately. And that happens largely because there's high concentrations of social services in certain areas of the city, while other areas of the city have no support for homeless people. And a project I was involved in together with Studio Turpelhoek in San Francisco is called Lava May. And it made an attempt to challenge that unbalance and offer an alternative service for the homeless. So the design task was to convert a typical San Francisco city public bus that was donated to the project, converted into a bathroom on wheels. So the shower bus gives about 30 showers a day in different parts of the city. And it's independent of the social service system, but it is dependent on the city in a way that it gets its fire from the fire hydrants, and it is allowed to dump the grey water into the sewage system. And the bus facade can act as a skin for advertisement for any of the donators who keep the bus running in terms of gas prices and bathing supplies, etc. And here are a few of interior views of the final product, showing the attempt to bring some more dignity and fairly simple and tight ways to the city. So the kitchen. I'm sure you're familiar with food trucks, but I find the food truck scene in San Francisco a really good example of ways that businesses can bypass a lot of slow bureaucracy and also unaffordable real estate. So building permits can take a very long time in San Francisco to be approved. Neighborhoods are changing very fast due to gentrification. And also it's quite expensive to develop a brand that works locally. So I believe what wheels allow for a business is to test out locations. It allows for flexible service hours, and it allows to build a brand without a huge commitment. So if a certain type of truck or business idea in a truck didn't work out, for example, a taco truck wasn't successful, maybe you can turn it into a juice bar and that would work instead. So reconfiguring such a small space is a whole lot easier and cheaper than doing so in a storefront. Also, similar to Estonian trucks that serve small villages, like library trucks and grocery store trucks, different businesses are also popping up in the Bay Area, and they mostly serve business areas with different services. So therefore, they create kind of a more spontaneous commercial area in the city where the city doesn't actually offer that yet. And let's look at the living room. In 2005, a local architecture and art collective, Rebar, got their hands dirty to make an impact on the public space of the city. So Rebar says, more than 70% of San Francisco's downtown outdoor space is dedicated to the private vehicle, while only a fraction of that space is actually usable for the public realm. So the three architects figured if anybody can claim a space in the city with their private vehicle by simply paying a little bit of money for the parking spot. Why can't people without cars? And so they essentially paid for 2 hours of parking in downtown San Francisco that has very little green areas. They brought in the turf or the fake grass and the tree for shading and gave it back to the city as a kind of a miniature park. And that was the first parklet. So in a fully built downtown, green landscaping is pretty scarce, but spontaneity is even scarcer. So that idea got a lot of positive attention and took off as a parking day, which you may have heard of because it happens all over the world once a year. Yet it only turns a parking spot into a park for 1 day out of the year, or even counted hours out of the year. So it's far from making an actual impact on the public space, right? But what it is, it's proposing an alternative use, and it's challenging the status quo. It's also questioning the established kind of proper ways of using public space and encouraging a kind of a misuse of a tiny part of the city. And the ideas from parking day stuck, and in San Francisco currently anybody can turn their parking spot that is near their property into a parklet, a permanent parklet. And San Francisco even gave out this manual for parklets that establishes a lot of rules. This is just one extract of a pretty thick booklet that lays out all of the regulations and all of the design guidelines and materials and rules that come with the parklet. So therefore, it's the businesses that are attracted to the program are quite clearly the businesses that can get most benefit out of it, which are typically coffee shops and restaurants. And by investing into a parklet, they essentially gain more revenue. It becomes a kind of a public meeting spot, which then draws in more business to the businesses. So even though all of the parklets are required to be open to the public at all times, they still become part of the business and a kind of another sidewalk seating. So it's interesting how the initial idea of very quickly and very affordably turning parking spaces into pedestrian spaces by anyone and anywhere has turned into a highly regulated process now. And there's a kind of a fine balance between making parkletting easier, or these kinds of roots level initiations easier for people, and actually over-regulating them and making them kind of lose their potential. So let's look at the bedroom. A couple of months ago, my friend Gerrit moved into this truck from his actually very beautiful Victorian home. His boyfriend had been living in that truck for a while already and actually parked it in front of Gerrit's home. So they essentially kind of lived together and had one bedroom that was fixed on foundation and another one that's fixed, another one unfixed or on wheels. The truck is now their permanent home, and more than that. So not only does it accommodate themselves, who are two tall men, and all their belongings, it's also their kind of adventure machine. So they're free to sleep anywhere, right? They're free to park anywhere they're allowed to. That can mean in front of their favorite brunch place, so they can hop out quickly and beat the line. It also acts as a cabin in woods or a beach house, and at the same time a downtown loft during weekdays. So it certainly comes with trade-offs in terms of utilities, but it also comes with huge savings and a bit of adventure as well. So let's speak at the second bedroom really fast. Communal living that evolved in the Bay Area during the 60s is still alive in San Francisco. Oftentimes it's described as intentional community. And these co-living houses select their residents carefully, so it's a well-curated community. While there are at least 50 communes in San Francisco right now, one of the most well-known and active communities is Embassy Network. This is one of their buildings. The community consists of 4 houses right now. They each have their own set of residents, their own focus, and own kind of spatial experience. So the common thread is for them is to be tech-savvy, non-political, and have a kind of a public or semi-commercial aspect to them as well. So the lifestyle that works, and it's far from just being an affordable way to live in San Francisco. It works as a kind of a service for a lifestyle almost. It's a lifestyle that works for a modern nomad who is seeking for a whole lot more from a home than just a place to sleep. The Embassy Network lead, Jesse Schindler, points out that a large portion of the residents are freelancers or individual startup workers. So they work alone most of the day. Therefore, what they're looking from home is anything but isolation. Co-living is therefore one of the solutions to ease this singular lifestyle of a nomadic mind, and help build connections and make up for lack of socialization at work. By limiting the personal space to the extreme of a bunk bed or just a bigger bedroom, they make room for a lot of shared. They make more space for a lot of the shared activities, and they foster communication and also give kind of a sense of extended family there. And what's interesting about the embassy is that it's equally meant for long-term and short-term residents. And it means whether you're a permanent resident or you are passerby, you are engaged in the same lifestyle. So the flow of people through that co-living space is not considered anything disruptive. The opposite, the community's concept of sharing behaviors and kind of working out an alternative lifestyle of the flux of residents really supports that and builds up a kind of a richer experience. So this is an axonometric of the building. The upper level is mostly for sleeping purposes. It houses a lot of, that's like the housing part of the building. The middle area, more of a shared spaces like dining and living, and then there is a kind of a third aspect that is open to the public. So they dedicate some rooms where during the daytime it acts as a co-working space for anybody who is connected to the network to some extent, and it also houses events during the evening and lectures. Okay, so we've gotten a quick overview of some of the ways that San Franciscans are dealing with a city that's kind of a few sizes small for them. And all of those examples, as you can see, are very low budget, root level, bottom up projects. So we're wondering, how do designers fit into this picture? Are we somehow giving up some of the agency that we have by embracing the DIY? So in my school in San Francisco, we have approached this in a couple of ways. Top-down way, bottom-up way, and kind of a looking ahead or visionary way. So this is not by any means a complete list, or neither am I suggesting that that we would have to pick or have a preference, but So the projects I will be showing have seats on all of all of them in them. And I'm also curious about your feedback and thoughts on this kind of the way you would approach the more bottom-up movements. So the top-down approach is essentially a good framework that's flexible and expandable. And it creates some sort of outer restraints that allow for creativity within. This is common and well-known strategy for architects, but I wanted to share one of the most extreme examples of that, which is the Black Rock City. Some of you may already know the city. It's constructed in Nevada desert once a year for the Festival of Burning Man that houses more than 60,000 people. The city's been built in 2 or 3 months, and it has actually no infrastructure there previously, so it's really constructed from scratch. And also it gets completely disassembled very fast after the event. And the plan is repeated throughout the years, and it allows for the temporary residents to efficiently orient themselves within the blocks that are each filled with very unique content. As a result, there is really no block that looks like anything else, even though the structure of it or the established urban plan has really no flexibility, or it's not negotiable. It's a very kind of top-down approach in that way. So that's for the bigger city planning, and if we look at the kind of opposite spectrum of that, as an example, there's a project I was involved in, Urbanism from Within. And it directly deals with the current housing crisis. So the question we asked was, how can we very, very quickly insert a lot of new units into the city? So in search for the answer, we looked at the housing stock that we have at hand now and proposed ways we can do that without actually building anything. So after all, San Francisco is quite densely built up, and the historic Victorian buildings are by no means up for grabs in terms of taking them down or building upon them. So considering that the majority of San Francisco housing is actually built around the same time, as you could see from the graph earlier, and built out of this prefab stock material, the interiors of the buildings are a lot more alike than the exterior kind of decoration makes us think. So that led to researching the most common types most common housing types in order to identify the part that is most adaptable for an additional unit. So, for example, single-car garages turn into units that have a direct street access, and the residents can park their cars, therefore, in front of it as it becomes a driveway. These are some of the examples from me and my peers of trying to insert the units in such a way that doesn't affect the current units that are existing already. So this project is an example of a small-scale intervention that is inserted into an already existing framework, and as it gets replicated, it can have a significant effect on the urban scale, even though quite invisibly and internally. The level of flexibility in this case is kind of the opposite spectrum of the top-down approach, yet it can have an equally important effect in terms of designing for a city that's in constant change. Another example of up here in the attic. As a last approach that I'll be talking about, there are open-ended projects that move further away from actual concrete proposals and ask questions about the future. As a personal example of this is a project I recently worked on that asked the exact same questions of how to insert units into the city very fast. And this time, instead of looking at what we have at hand, we took a lot more radical stance. So we're imagining a city across the bay from San Francisco, free of any bureaucratic restrictions or historic references, since it's a naval base that is currently abandoned. So in that school project, we explored the problem of worker housing that the primary employers of the area are currently facing. So Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Really want to, but struggle building housing for their own employees. So currently the Silicon Valley cities are all opposed to building any larger developments than a single family home. So in the spirit of this open-ended schoolwork, we decided to think big and assume a few crazy things. What if the tech corporations united in buying that large empty lot right next to the city, and that has no established zoning laws or doesn't have to account with the current historic housing stock? How would we design differently? What technologies can we actually use to move really fast? So this is the view of right next to the city, a huge empty lot that actually has a plan to. They actually have a realistic plan to establish a cemetery there, in the in the shadow of this crisis. So we took several problems that are important for any new city, and we imagined them being solved by technology that is in its infancy right now. It was an ambitious studio. We wanted to tackle traffic congestion, walkability, affordability, robotics, and that kind of affordability that may one day help us design away from permanence and allow for us to rebuild our housing or our cities in a more regular basis. So first, there is no need for a street grid if the cars are driven by people. Cost and time of construction can be minimized using robots to build. We ended up using actual robots to help us prototype the city. And oh, that didn't play. And we also worked out a kind of a modular system and algorithmic patterns for the interior to be very flexible. So most of the time, the conditions of the city, such as economics and population change and industry change, happen a lot faster than architecture around it. So these changes are difficult, if not impossible, to predict. In my experience with a city that houses companies and movements that have been generally disrupting the global economics and culture for already decades, the way forward could be to design away from permanence. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella, for really relevant examples. Mm-hmm. I would have a question. What do you think, what stops Tallinn being the Silicon Valley or the San Francisco? I mean, the dream of all these tech and IT people.
Oh, yes, I have a microphone. What stops it being?
Well, we have two. I would say that we have two similarities. Mm-hmm. We have Tallinn has a really small rental market, and then we have this culture of startups. At least the hype of the startups.
Yeah, I guess maybe it could be a question whether there is room for two huge hubs, but it is actually true that. Somewhat it is being distributed. More and more startups are starting to look away from from San Francisco as well. So it's maybe more of a question whether this can be the start of kind of culture or the influx of these people, whether that can happen in many places at the same time, or it's more of a centralized. Also, the reason why San Francisco gets all of this influx or has historically gotten is the big international universities. So it's actually a concentration of a lot of universities that are like Stanford and Berkeley, that are just like the scale of it is rather big.
Okay. Any questions from the audience?
How the real estate business people feeling? Because there is the 40,000 plots what you can sell. And America is full of salespeople.
Yeah.
How they are, where they are sleeping or why they are not working?
Yeah, that's a great question that I think all San Franciscans are asking themselves. Actually, this issue is pretty complex. It has more to do with city authorities and the kind of an old money that's in San Francisco. It has more to do with that rather than the developers who actually are very interested in developing, clearly. It's the restrictions that are so tight that don't allow them to do much or allow them to do things very slowly. Buildings that are being built right now in San Francisco, a lot of them actually brought their papers into the city 10 years ago. Things move extremely slowly. The citizen the authority of the citizen is very strong, so it's very easy to oppose any new developments. So I can kind of go on and on of that, but there's a lot of rigidness that's already kind of there in the city and does not allow for to build upon itself.
Anybody else? Maybe a question about this person or the couple who lives in the truck now. Can they be part of this embassy kind of movement, or where, like, because they won't be part of any neighborhood anymore or not having roots? How do you socialize with people then?
Yeah, that's actually they are oftentimes, like I said earlier. They parked, like he used to park in front of Gerrit's home, right? So they're kind of almost engaging with a building that can be in flux because as people kind of move around. So it's their friends really that they can kind of reunite with or choose to actually live very close to somebody. But also the kind of utilities question where Gerrit, we used to go to school together, so he spent most of his time kind of in the architecture department, showered there, etc. So he had that community, and he just graduated. So it is kind of interesting to see how will they do it more in a much more nomadic way without having that home base.
And you are not living in a truck in San Francisco. Where do you live? How did you find?
I have a luck, or I had a luck to move in a few years ago. The first GIF I showed you, this change has happened so fast that only within a few years. So when I moved there, it didn't seem reasonable, but considering everything that happened afterwards, it's actually a fairly reasonable rent now with a rent control. So a lot of people make it a goal to get an apartment that has a rent control. Therefore, it cannot be increased into a market level rent. So I have a rare kind of luck to live in a very conventional apartment right now.
Also something we don't have here, like this regulated rental market.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Questions? But thank you then for the lovely presentation.
Thank you.